told also. And also a public service announcement for next week. If you've been watching the weather, it's gonna get, for this area, bitterly cold down into the teens. So if anyone has any difficulty, heat, whatever, make sure somebody knows about it so we can double up or take care of you. Yes, sir.
I don't know what date yet, but the first part of next year, I've got some artery surgery
Okay.
coming up. And my children are gonna start back, I guess I can call him a child too. Home tomorrow morning for Kansas. They've got weather coming in up there and they want to get home before it gets there. Remember them and their travel.
Yes, sir.
Me and the stuff that's coming up.
Yes, sir. Remember Brother Burt in your prayers. He's got some artery surgery coming up next year. Don't know exactly when. And then those that are going to be on the road traveling, make sure we keep those in our prayers. We want everybody to get home safe. Yes, sir.
We had a good friend who was killed in a car accident this past week. His name is Edward Gilpin. Funeral was yesterday.
Edward Gilpin. Okay. Keep that family in your prayers. Anyone else? Brother David, would you lead us in prayer, please?
Let's pray. God, our Heavenly Father, we thank you for there are many that are hurting right now, this time of season especially. We ask that you be with the Gilpin family as they are dealing with this loss. We also know that there are many that are sick. We ask that you be with Brother Burt in the surgery that he's about to go through, and also the surgeons as they correct the issue, and we pray for good results. We thank you for this congregation here. We ask that you be with it and help it to continue to strengthen itself in knowledge. God, we thank you for the things you've given us, especially your Son. It's in your Son's name that we pray.
Amen. We are just about finished with this quarter. We've got one more Sunday after this, and that's going to be Christmas Day. And any man that wants to teach on that Sunday is welcome to it. I don't. If nobody else does, I'll be up here, but you're welcome to have the class if you want it. We're down to chapter 12, which is called Visiting Prospective Members. Chapter 13 also deals with that, and we're going to try to get through both 12 and 13 today, and that will then leave us with the closing chapter next week. Visiting prospective members. Also, they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, I'm an old dog, and I'm trying. But the Bible that I have at home, that's the New King James Version, has a real small print in it that I can't read, so I'm still hanging on to my King James. Got several of those, and I can read them. And I'm looking for a new one, and Wednesday night, not this one, but a previous, well, maybe it wasn't Wednesday night, but anyway, Brother Clarence said, what's the most expensive or most money you've ever paid for a Bible? Well, I'm searching for a giant print New King James Version. I'm very specific on what I want. I want it verses, not paragraph. I want it columns. I want it this, that, and the other. And when I found one, I said, okay. And then I looked, and they said it won't be available until March of 2023. And then I looked a little bit farther, and it said the binding was Smythe sewn, which is great. Cover was goatskin. And I'm going, uh-oh. And then I look at the price. I'm not going to buy that Bible. I'm not going to pay $260 for a Bible. So I'm still looking for a Bible with New King James with print big enough I can read, because the reason I mention that is we've got new songbooks that we're going through, making sure all the songs are scriptural, and then putting a stamp on that they're the property of the church here. And at the same time, we ordered some New King James Pew Bibles. So since we're going to put New King James in the pew, I figured I'm just going to have to bite the bullet and change over to using New King James to make things easier. But today we're going to be looking at visiting prospective members. In the book that we have, I'm going to skip the first paragraph and go to the second. It says, "For many years we've been fighting prejudices associated with what might be called traditional concepts." Now, I'm speaking here, of course, with regard to methods and not doctrine. The old doctrine need never to be revised, but the methods of teaching these doctrines need to be continually examined to make certain we are reaching maximum effectiveness. Now, I have been in classes before where they have been teaching how to evangelize and go out, and there's formulas that you can use, and used to it was the Joel Miller film strips. Some of you may remember those. But anyway, they're taking that from the classes that I was in. It was as though you were going out to somebody who had never heard anything about the Bible, and you're being able to set up a class and start from scratch and teach them what they need to do to be converted. Well, that's one method, but there are many methods that you can use to reach somebody who does not know the truth. And you have to be flexible. There is no one method that is perfect for all situations. And I will give you a for instance. Can you name me one of the hardest groups, religious groups, there is to talk to about the truth? Because they are so indoctrinated in their beliefs. There are several, but can you name me one? Catholic. For many years, they didn't want anybody to read the Bible. They just wanted them to believe what they was told. You said Jehovah's Witness? Well, when I was in the Air Force many years ago, it was allowed then. I don't know if it is today or not, but I always had my Bible on my desk. I had a desk job, and I always had my Bible on my desk. We couldn't go out and actively talk to anybody, especially if they worked for us for coercion purposes and such. But if anybody brought the subject up, you could engage in conversation. And I had a young man that worked for me that was a Jehovah's Witness. And he had been diagnosed with cancer. He was going to need surgery. And during his pre-op discussion and all, they was going to send him to Mississippi for the surgery. And it came up that he might need to have some blood. Well, the Jehovah's Witness, they do not believe in getting blood, giving blood, taking blood. So he's come and asked me the question. And I said, I will study with you on one condition. I said, that is that we use the Bible only, and you give me a set of questions, give me a night to look them up. I will give you book, chapter, and verse for you to read. Then you can go home and study. You can talk to your preacher, because I knew that's what he was going to do. Then you bring me another set of questions. And I worked with him about a week on that, and after a week. But you can't always, if I had sat there and said, sure, but you can't always, if I had sat there and said, sure, we'll discuss it, I'm going to go through the Joel Miller film strips with you, where would we have been? In other words, what I'm trying to say is you have to take a person where they are and move on up through it. And if you can answer their immediate questions and get them feeling comfortable with you using the Bible only, then you can work into the other essentials. But you got to start where they need to start, not where you want to start them. Does that make sense? And anybody have any similar situations? I'm sorry?
The Ethiopian eunuch.
Well, the Ethiopian eunuch, he was already reading and he was very receptive, so
He took it from where he was at.
took it from where he was at. There was another case in Memphis, Tennessee. The wife attended regularly and the guy would not come in the building. He was next door neighbor, a couple of houses down, so I got to talking to him and got to be friends with him, and he was into electronics, and I was a deacon at that time over the youth group, and we was having film series. Back in those days, you could go to the library and get the reels of film and show movies and all, and so I asked him and messed with him to the point where he would come and help me do that. So I was getting him in the back door and around kids and fellowshipping a little bit with people of the congregation. Took about a month, but then one Sunday morning he showed up with his wife. So you don't automatically have to go up to somebody and hit them over the head with the Bible at a starting point. You have to work your way into having them feel comfortable with you and then work your way up through that. Again, anybody have any similar or anything? Yes, sir.
I appreciate the way you approach that. I was with a congregation years ago, people could go out and visit families that were not members of the church, and sometimes they would come. The preacher, and I'm glad our preacher don't do that, he would get up in the pulpit with those people in the audience saying how dumb they were, maybe not in those exact words, but it come out to mean that. To not just believe the Bible. You have to work your way in easy. And I think that's what you were doing with that individual.
Yes, sir. On both occasions, we was trying to get them to trust the Bible, but we didn't just start beating them over the head with it. So, well, one, I guess I did, the Jehovah's Witness, because I told him I wouldn't study with him if he didn't use that one only. So, but he was already familiar with stuff like that. So, anything else? I'm sure that many of you have some situations you could talk about. But next paragraph says, we know that the early church accomplished the great task of preaching in every nation under heaven within 30 years after the commandment was given. I had a situation here, and that's Colossians 1:23, when Paul says that it's been preached to the whole world. Had a situation here where, again, I was in a position where I could not bring up the Bible or religious talk, but if anybody else did, I could continue. And he told me one day that he said, we are the first generation of people that have been able to evangelize the whole world because of all the modern technology we have. And I says, okay. I said, what are you going to do about Colossians 1:23 when Paul said he had? He stuttered a minute and then said, well, he said, Paul was talking about the then known world, but Christ was talking about the whole world. And I just said, I backed up a minute and I said, well, why would Christ be talking about the whole world, but then Paul limit his conversation to the then known world? He didn't have an answer for that, but I hope that it prompted him to go home and do some more studying on the subject. There's basically two methods that they talk about in this book about evangelizing, and one they call it mass, which means that We see people, we invite them to church, or we get a study group and we do it en masse. But then we also look at house to house, one-on-one type thing. And if you go back and just glean through the Bible, if you go to Acts chapter 5 and verse 42, for instance, it says, "And daily in the temple and in every house they ceased not to teach and preach Jesus Christ." It was daily, it was en masse at the temple, and it was individual or personal from house to house. And also in Acts 20, verse 20, "Have taught you publicly and from house to house." This is a statement from Paul in regard to his work at Ephesus, and Paul used both kinds of evangelism. How many of you, and no show of hands, please, no show of hands, just want you to think about this and ask yourself the question. But how many of you have failed at one point in your Christian journey to take advantage of an opportunity to talk to someone about Christ and the church, their soul being saved? I dare say that there's not a one of us in here that wouldn't show their hand on that one. I've missed opportunities. Why do we miss opportunities to talk to someone that way? How many of us have missed opportunity to talk to a family member that's not a Christian? A good friend. Why? Pardon?
I think we'll have another opportunity.
Have another opportunity. Now it's not just the perfect time, so I won't do it now. Is there ever going to be a perfect time? Don't we have to try every time we have just the least little opening? I know I'm talking a lot today about I and things I'm doing, but I'm not in your head, so I don't know what you're doing, and that's why I keep asking who's got something else. A few weeks ago, a young lady that's good friends when my son and daughter were in high school, she and her twin sister was best friends with my two. Her twin sister passed away a couple of years ago, but she calls to check on us every now and then, and I was talking to her, and she said she was in the process of getting a divorce, and her husband had tried to kill her. Well, after we talked for just a few minutes, I thought about it, and I know she's not a member of the church, and my parting comment, or closing comment, was, "There's a song that you need to look up." I said, "It will help you through this situation." By the way, on January the 1st, that's the first Sunday of the January in the new year, I'm going to be preaching the sermon on that song. And the title of it is, "Christ's Love is All We Need." Christ's love is all I need. And a couple of weeks later, she called me up, checked on us again, and she said, "I looked that song up." Said it really helped. Did I take opportunity at that time to not only help her, but maybe encourage her to start looking toward the church? Didn't think about it at the time, but in looking back on it, I think I did. I think I took an opportunity that availed itself. The same thing happened when I was in the doctor's office this past Friday for my regular checkup. Had to go in and have some blood drawn, and the lady there had some poems up, and religious verses. Now, I could have sat there and let her draw blood and go on my way and not say anything, but I took opportunity to talk to her a little bit. I've even invited her to church. Was I doing anything special? Nope. Just taking advantage of an opportunity. Brother David Howard, I overheard him do the same thing. Not to embarrass you, but a few weeks ago when we was having so much difficulty with our internet, with our Wi-Fi and streaming and all, we got to church that Sunday evening, and the repairman was out there stringing new cable and all, and I overheard David, he was going to stay with him to make sure that he had cleared. You overhear him say that or not, but that's, got to take advantage of every opportunity. Anybody else got a story you want to tell? Okay, I'll ask you some questions and make you talk. It says, question 1, is the cottage meeting concept of evangelism the forerunner of apostasy? Pardon? Be just the opposite? Well, I think where he's going with this, and you've got to remember this book was written back in the 1990s, and there was some things coming on board at that time that wasn't scriptural. People were using cottage meetings in the evening and separating and divided and not coming together to meet as a congregation. So that might be what he had in mind, but one-on-one study or group study in a home, when you are not missing services at church, there's, as Brother Clunt said, it's right the opposite of being bad. It's a good thing. What is meant by traditional concepts? Way we've always done it. Why will that not work today in some situations? Pardon? It might, but if we go back to when I was a teenager, most folks didn't have a phone. Today, everybody's got a phone. Nobody had a computer. You didn't call somebody in advance and say, can I come over and visit with you? You just showed up on their doorstep. But with everybody being as busy as they are today, on some of the outings that we have made to hang tags and invite people to meetings and things like that, used to, people wouldn't give you a cold shoulder even if they didn't want to listen to you, because they're just glad somebody come to visit with them, and they would talk to you. People are not as friendly today as they used to be, and we can get into all the reasons why, but the world that we live in today is much different than the world we lived in 30, 40 years ago. Some of the things that we used to do, go knock on a door and talk to somebody in a friendly way, they've even got signs that no soliciting, no this, no that, and if you show up, they want you gone. They don't even want to deal with you. So we've got to try another method to reach those folks. We live stream all our services now that we got everything back working. That's one way to reach out. It's not the end goal. I mean, you need eyes-on, one-on-one conversation with people, but we've just got to use every tack we can, because we talked earlier in the book about getting names of people that are moving into the community, and we can't even do that because of various laws and policies of the companies and all. So how do we know when somebody moved in the neighborhood? We're scattered around here. If we see a sign that somebody's moved in or moved out and look for somebody coming in, would you feel unsafe to walk next door where you live if somebody walked in and welcome to the neighborhood? I know in some places in the United States, I would not want to go. But in this area, I feel real safe with my neighborhood.
Where I live, nobody just wanders up to my door without a purpose.
If they do, you wondering what's going on, right? Yeah, yeah. There are those, but, pardon? Problem is, when I was younger, everybody knew everybody. On the, you know.
Normally you didn't lock your doors.
And normally didn't lock your doors. And now, if I ask, to show hands, I would venture to say that the majority of you in here can't tell me the name of your next door neighbor. Maybe 2 houses down or 3 houses down, or across the street, or immediately next door. Because when we go home, and what do? We go in, we close the door. We turn on that magic machine that talks to us all the time. Not out in the yard, not going around, not checking on things, not seeing what's going on. I'm sorry?
Phrase today is
Good fences make good neighbors. We, I think, going along with this book, it is not the world's problem, it's our problem because we have isolated ourselves. Y'all can get your rocks out and throw them now if you want to, but am I pretty close to right on that?
Wouldn't this be another instance where we're called to be different?
I'm sorry?
Wouldn't this be another instance where we're called to be different?
Called to be different?
We need to be out and be involved, because in the places and times where I have made that effort, yeah, you get the people who don't want to have anything to do with you, but if you're consistent about it, it pays dividends. You start getting people involved, people start expecting you to be certain places, or miss you when you're not there. We're supposed to be different than normal. Being present and involved, as weird as it sounds, is now abnormal.
Well, I think one of the greatest things we can do is our lifestyle. What we say is one thing, but what we do is something else. And if people see what we do, just like the case I was talking about when I was in the Air Force, the guy came up to me and asked. Now, I did not leave that Bible on my desk for show or for pretense or anything else, but when I would take my coffee break, usually 5 minutes instead of 15, but I'd pick my Bible up and I might be reading it and drinking a cup of coffee and then go back to work. It was just a convenient place to have it. But if people, and this sort of goes along with what we're talking about on lifestyle, those of you that still work, how many of your fellow employees know that you're a Christian? Do you act one way at work and act another way at home? They got to see who you are before you can talk to them about things like that. Yes, sir.
He doesn't touch specifically on it, but he kind of talks about it in his last couple paragraphs in this particular lesson. But hopefully we're trending this next year. I know we're going to talk about the tools you can use to evangelize and methods, like he's talking about methods here. But even us as an eldership, we're having issues packing everything we wanted to do in our calendar for next year. And we're trying to come up with some more opportunities to do outreach. And, I think sometimes we get ourselves so busy, and then we wonder why we can't evangelize the world, is because we're spending too much time in our own little room. So we got, to do this, we gotta get out.
Yes, sir. We got 7 days in the week. We got to figure out how to put it to use. Let's skip down to chapter 13 and go through that section. It says, since our failure in the area of personal evangelism is so obvious, it should do us good to examine the reasons why. Now, he made a bold statement there. In the area of personal evangelism, it's obvious that we're a failure. And that was written in the 90s. But is that also true today? Are we a failure? What describes a failure? Let your foot slide through the ring.
You don't have the outcome you desire.
Uh,
We're having difficulty growing as a church, and that's Brotherhood wide, really.
well, I sort of like to go back to Socrates on that one. Socrates says, falling down is not a failure. Failure is to stay where you have fallen. So if we fall into the trap of being satisfied with where we are and not trying to move forward and advance, then we're a failure. Trying is never a failure. Failing to try, in my opinion, is where we fail. Yes, sir?
We would look at the sower, and we would say, well, he failed really in 3 areas. He didn't. He was doing his job as far as planting the seed, and the reception of it one way or the other. We'd say 25%. Look at the 4 different areas. One was only the one that became fruitful.
To Terry's point, I don't think the decision has been made whether we're a failure or not yet. We can look at trends and say we're not doing the things that we should, so we should change that. But I don't think you're considered a failure until God tells you that you failed.
Until you have no more opportunity, yeah.
You can look and see what your glide slope is and see what path you're on, but there's opportunity to change and to improve.
Right now, though, you can do a self-examination, and if I do a self-examination of myself, I can say without a doubt, I need to improve.
And that's what I think Terry was getting at.
Yeah.
So was that he was continuing to do, and he probably focused his efforts on the fertile ground, but, he would modify as needed. So that's what he would do.
And I think the writer of the book hit it just right in this next phrase here. He said, religion today has become a pastime to many Christians. It is something to occupy their time on Sunday morning and then is forgotten the rest of the week. Anybody agree with that or disagree with that statement?
We've been living with denominationalism long enough that everybody thinks they're okay with whatever they're doing, so long as it's religious in nature.
That's correct. Brother Terry said that we've been living with denominationalism so long that people feel like they're okay with what they're doing. But if you really get back to the Bible, we're not okay. We need to do it daily. And it said, then skipping on down, it says, someone once put it, the whole work of the whole church is to preach the whole gospel to the whole world. And if we're not making an attempt to do that, I think that's where we're heading in the wrong direction. Then he says, lack of training is another reason for this failure. As Brother David Howard has already mentioned, we're We're trying to do things different for next year, and we've started this class and doing some training on this in this area now for a few months. But if you just sit back and take a look back, just a broad spectrum, how many of you have had training on how to evangelize? Or how many of you have had opportunity to go to a class and learn but didn't go? I'm going to let y'all talk now.
They came to Jesus and asked him to teach them to pray. Matter of prayer can be something that's taught, and the essential personal evangelism can be taught.
Yes, sir.
I know it's been discussed, you know, in some lessons along the way, but the last actual class that we were in, that I was in, remember, I was pregnant with the twins, and Jeremy will be 37. I mean, an actual class devoted to teaching that, and Jay Andrews taught it. So, I mean, I'm sure it's been discussed some since then, but not an actual class.
The last class that that I was in, that was not of auditorium class, but a small group class where we studied the subject and even had some practice at talking to people, a real class like Brother Andrew set up, was in 1991 or 92. So that's been just about as long going on. So,
Excuse me, not to take away anything of the value of a structured class like this or anything else, but we need to remember that every time we read the New Testament and look at the accounts there, it is a blueprint on how to evangelize. You look at the accounts of the conversions in Acts. Sometimes they were sermons preached on the spot, and the lesson was received well. But you also see, excuse me, you also see these one-on-one study sessions where individuals sit down with whoever will listen, whoever is available. And not only do they teach them the gospel, but they involve themselves in their life. That's what the point of the New Testament is, aside from us learning how to get to heaven. It's how to teach the gospel and what we're supposed to teach. We often say things like, oh, we need a class, we need to be taught what to do. And again, I'm not trying to take anything away from it, because there's value all over the place in things like that. But we need to remember that first and foremost, our best authority, as with everything else in life, is going to be the Scripture.
yes, sir. I think basically one of our greatest problems in this area is we're afraid of failure. We're afraid of rejection. But going to what Brother Jeremy just said, if we go and look at the New Testament, who was the greatest teacher of all in the New Testament? That's not a trick question. Jesus. That was not a trick question. Did Jesus fail to convert some people? Almost thou persuadest me. If you look at when he raised Lazarus from the dead, the people standing around that eyeball the miracle that took place, getting somebody that had been dead for 4 days, already smelling kind of bad, walking out of a tomb, some believed and some did not. So we need to put the idea of, I don't want to be rejected out of our mind, because you're going to be rejected. Not everybody's going to receive you. Yes, sir.
Well, it's kind of like when people get up to run a race, there's only going to be one winner. So why are the other ones running? You think about, well, they think they have a chance, or they're maybe thinking they're going to try to improve themselves, whatever, but, you know, you gotta get to the race first. I think so many times, like you said, fear, you know, well, we're not gonna win, so let's not just do it. And that should be our attitude.
You know the people I admire the most in a race? Have you ever seen any of these races where somebody has almost made it to the finish line and they fall down? Everybody goes by them. Do they just lay there? Not unless they got a bone sticking out. They get up and they, even sometimes with help, but they cross that finish line. They keep going. And I think that's the attitude that we need to incorporate, is to keep going. Don't worry about being told no. Go to somebody else. Maybe you're told yes. He closes out this section by saying, soul winning is not an impossibility. You can be a soul winner, but it will take great dedication and a willingness to learn all one can about the art of soul winning. If you are seriously interested, may I suggest the following books? And he goes through and lists a bunch. But the old proverb about a long journey begins with one step, the first step. That's where we need to start. We need to decide that we are going to attempt to follow what God said in the New Testament, and we are to attempt to evangelize the world. I think another misconception that a lot of people have about evangelizing is we want to collect a bunch of money and send somebody to do our job 3,000 or 4,000 miles away to a country that's never heard of the gospel. Foreign mission work is great, as Brother Jeremy has alluded to, that there's a lot of great programs. But I'm not so sure but what within the next few months I'm not going to figure out how to have a sign put on the back of our door right here that says, you're now entering what? Pardon? The mission field. You are now entering the mission field. When you walk out these doors, are you in a mission field? You are, if not everybody around you is a Christian. Boy, that was good timing, wasn't it? Thank y'all for the few comments that was made. Appreciate you listening to me. Does anyone want to teach next Sunday? I guess I'll do it again then. Thank y'all.